Well, good afternoon, everybody. And officially, welcome back to our students, faculty, staff. Welcome to the 27th annual Convocation that has traditionally served as both the welcoming and the beginning of the spring term, but also to commemorate the life and work of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And here we are today. Can I have an amen that we have Convocation happening after 2 cancellations? Payton? You're going to hear from Payton here in a moment, but Payton was scheduled to come twice now, and the third time is a charm that we have assembled with only a little rain out there. So I'm glad we're here today, and it's great to have everybody in here in Alumni Hall to join us for this event. And thinking about this event today and all that it represents, particularly around the influence and the inspiration that Dr. King provided, it's important to remind ourselves that we, Juniata College, stand among a strong tradition of peacemakers. From the earliest beginnings, the Church of the Brethren, who began this fine institution, were a people of peace and wholly committed to equality and justice. Over the years, they have believed in and supported the paradigm of nonviolent change. And the Juniata community continues to promote, educate, and participate in the work of peace and justice in our world and within our own communities. Many of you know Congressman John Lewis, who even today remains in the news. Many of you may not know, but Congressman Lewis visited. For the faculty and staff in your room, do you remember what year Congressman Lewis was here? Think about it. Almost 15 years ago, 2004, Congressman Lewis visited the Juniata community. Because we have it documented in Voices, our literary magazine, is Jim Tootin's probably not here. He's on sabbatical. Give him a shout out. We record these visits and these speeches so we can remember some of the events and the words that these speakers have brought our own community. And in 2004, Congressman Lewis remarked to our community, and I quote, "So I say to you, Juniata students, don't be afraid to get in the way. Don't be afraid to get into trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble, to build the beloved community. Not here just in America, but around the world." Congressman Lewis continued, "This great college comes from a rich history, one of peace, one of love, one of nonviolence. You must be able to teach the rest of the world that maybe, just maybe, humankind should evolve to a higher level." End quote. John Lewis, like Dr. King, has lived out those words, and his passion for equality and justice remain as central to him today as it did in Selma in the 1960s. Today, as we begin a new semester together, we too need to continue our work of peace and inclusion for a better and more just world. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you Grace Cook-Huffman, class of 2022. Please rise as we get a chance to sing Lift Every Voice. Grace?
of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Well, good evening, and welcome to our 2019 MLK Convocation. I am Dr. Marita Gilbert. I am the Dean of Institutional Equity and Inclusive Excellence. I have several tasks this evening, one of which is to take this moment to ensure that we have all silenced our devices. So if we could all check really quickly to make sure we have done that. I want to begin this evening by inviting us all to pause to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Ona Ta'aga, the Oneida Nation, the people of the Standing Stone who had a village here at the time of colonization. Let us take a brief pause to acknowledge that we are here because they were here. Thank you. And thank you for being here today, as winter has caused us to reschedule our spring convocation date. I want to thank Grace Cook Huffman for leading us in singing what we often refer to as the Black National Anthem. And there are others that consider it to be a hymn. Historical and cultural scholars note that the song, originally written as a poem by James Weldon Johnson, conveys a pride and reverence for our moments of both struggle and resilience in the past, for those who have paved the way for our lives in this moment, and faith in a brighter future. One of the things I was asked to do is to talk a little bit about why we sang two verses today. So the first verse, many of us have heard or encountered at some point in our lives before. Some of us, however, have been blessed to have been raised by both a nuclear family and a village that helped to nurture us. And in my village, we sang the third verse, and it was always very sacred. And it was sang almost as a prayer, right? Hoping for a brighter future while acknowledging all that we had been through to get to this point. So I wanted us to sing both verses today to help focus our purpose for gathering today, which of course is to honor the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There are many aspects about King's legacy worthy of reflection. Often, I think when we think about Dr. King and we speak about Dr. King, we think of him as the looming historical figure that left this indelible mark on history, right? And when we do that, we often forget about Martin, the man. And Martin was a young man, a very young man. He was a young man when he began his life in public service, and he was a young man when he was ultimately taken from us. So I want us to think today as we're talking through our convocation about Martin, the young man. He was a young man who inspired young people. He inspired an entire generation of young people who ranged in identities, artists, athletes, Sunday school teachers, even children, right? He inspired them to do the hard work, not to wait until they were adults to ask the big questions. He inspired them to be risk takers, right? I mean, if you really want to think about it, thinking about the Birmingham children who very dangerously walked en masse out of their classrooms, their schoolhouses, and into jailhouses. He inspired a generation of people, young people, to be both dreamers and in the meantime, be doers, right? He inspired young people to change the world and the communities in which they were living in by becoming the firsts, often the first in their homes, their families, their households, the first in their neighborhoods, the first in their communities to become educators, to become lawyers and public servants, the first to become scientists, the first to own businesses. And so I'm taking this moment because although I was greatly troubled each time we had to delay convocation, this date affords us the opportunity to not only commemorate the life and legacy of Dr. King, but to open our institutional celebration of Black History Month. Black history is, after all, American, if not world history. And so, as we think about the King legacy, as we think about Black History Month, our reflections should include not only history made by those who have paved the way for all of our lives in this moment, but we should consider the history being made right now and in real time. And there is perhaps no better person to lead us in doing so than tonight's speaker. And so that leads me to my final task, which is to prepare you for the introduction of our speaker. Now, originally, I'm often asked to introduce our speaker, but I thought it most appropriate that our MLK Convocation speaker be introduced by someone who I think greatly embodies many of the aspects of the King legacy. And so with that, I invite April Wells to the podium.
Thank you for that nice introduction. And while I do that, I also think there's a lot of Black and brown women and men on campus who also do the same thing. So today you're gonna hear an introduction from all of us, if that's okay with you guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are here to introduce the speaker for this evening, Payton Head. As a member of the LGBTQ community and as in the Black community, Payton has experienced the direct impact of a racist culture. While president of the University of Missouri Students Association, he promoted conversations about systemic racism on campus, which sparked student protests that made national headlines and led to the resignation of the university's president.
Payton's daring mindset and leadership skills led him to help organize and present at the first White House convening for diversity and inclusion in higher education, and to partner with the National Campus Leadership Council and the Department of Education to co-author a guide for student leaders for addressing inclusion.
Because of his work, Payton Head is also a recipient of the NAACP Image Award for the work highlighting the theme of Courage Will Not Skip This Generation. Payton Head's work has also inspired students to be more than just another number, but an individual advocate.
So today, as a group, we want to thank you for coming to what we call our Juniata. We also want to thank you for accepting the invitation to come talk to us. And now to everybody, we introduce Payton Head.
Wow. I've probably been to maybe 50 schools since I've graduated from the University of Missouri, and that's possibly the warmest introduction that I've ever received. So thank you all so much for that. I am so excited to be with you all today. My flight was canceled so many times. I live in Chicago now, that's where I'm originally from, and it was negative 23 degrees last week when we tried to get me on out here, so I'm so glad that you all were able to make it out today. So the very first thing that I want to do before I give you all this long presentation, that won't be that long because I have to get you all out of here eventually, is I want you all to take the time, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, to introduce yourself to somebody new. And let me finish before you all do this. I only say this because I come here and I speak for 45 minutes, basically. We do a Q&A, I have a lunch with student leaders, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, this is your community, right? You all are gonna be here. You all are gonna be coexisting and living with each other long after I'm gone. So if you all can remember this one moment and take this one moment in time to maybe introduce yourself to somebody who, you may see them, you may lock eye contact every now and then because you have the same schedule on the way to class or whatever it may be. Whoever that person is, go ahead and take 2 minutes to introduce yourself to somebody new right now. I like that because it shifts the energy in the room and it also makes me less nervous. Because I know that you all are more acquainted with each other. And at least at the end of the day, if some of you all hated my speech, whatever I had to say, or you don't remember whatever I said today, at least you took the time to meet somebody new. And to me, that is the vision and the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr., and that's creating a community. Because we're tackling some big societal issues, and I'll talk to you about one today that I dealt with in my time in my undergraduate experience at the University of Missouri. So here's a little bit about me currently. You all heard a brief bio. But I am a student myself once again. I came back home after living in DC for 2 years, working with the National Campus Leadership Council and student government presidents to empower them on inclusion and equity initiatives. I am at the University of Chicago now in my home community, and I am studying, getting a master's in, public policy, global conflict studies, and international development. So that's been really, really fun being back in school. I missed class today, so I will have to get back first thing tomorrow, but I'm really, really excited to be with you all. If there's anything that speaks to you, any quote or message or whatever that you want to tweet at me or Instagram at me or message me or whatever or email me later, go ahead. Please feel free to do that. I am an open book, open conversation, but I have some questions for you all, because I just want to gauge what this community is like. How many of you, this is the furthest east you've ever lived in your life? All right, okay. For how many of you, it's the west, the furthest west? Wow, okay. How many of you all are from cities with more than 1 million people in it? Okay. How many of you all are from cities with less than 50,000 people in it? Less than 20,000? Less than 1,000? All right. So the thing is, we have this conversation about diversity, right? And people be like, oh, well, I'm not diverse, so I don't need to take part in this conversation or learn anything. You all have clearly shown that you all are diverse. You come from different places, different times, you have different upbringings, different experiences. And something interesting happens when you all get put in one place, right? Either it works really well and you have an incredible sense of community, or a lot of times you have tensions. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the experiences that I had at the University of Missouri, which is still today one of my homes. I was coming from Chicago, so a fairly large city, America's largest city, third largest city, sorry. I want to take that away from New York, because who wants that traffic? Not I. I came to Chicago. I ended up following my twin sister. I was studying political science there. My twin sister studied journalism and communications. They're known for their journalism school. And so I said, oh, this campus is cute. Let me go check it out. It'll be great. And I ended up falling in love with Mizzou. So Mizzou, for those of y'all who don't know, is the University of Missouri. It's just a clipping of the word. My freshman year when I got on campus, after being promised all this one Mizzou propaganda and that this was going to be so incredible and so wonderful for everybody, I never felt more, not isolated, but just segregated. I felt like there were so many different cliques and that there were so many different groups of people. I felt like there was Black Mizzou, there was Greek Mizzou, there was Black Greek Mizzou, there was Athletic Mizzou, there was so many different Mizzous, but I didn't see one Mizzou, right? And I remember just being at a conversation my freshman year, and the chancellor gave a big speech on the status of diversity at the University of Missouri. And it was this big deal because they had launched the Chancellor's Diversity Initiative and all this other kind of stuff. But it had no funding and all this other kind of stuff. And I remember as a freshman, I got up to a mic just like this, and I said, hey, I'm a freshman here, and I just want to know, like, when are you going to put your money where your mouth is? When are we going to actually have resources here that make sure that we're not just on talk, because it all looks great on the page. I used to pose for the little Mizzou store, bookstore pictures. I'm still in the bookstore now. You know, you have one black, one Asian, one white kid. And I'm the one reading a physics book, even though I was a political science major. So I know how all of this works. I was a tour guide. I was a summer orientation leader. I became a member of the Legion of Black Collegiate Student Government. Oddly, I was a member of the Asian American Association. I don't know how that happened. I went to Unification, which is like our big Asian student orientation for the year, met some of my best friends. They're like, oh, come on, you're a member now. I was like, because I was just like, oh, I'm gonna be an ally. I'm gonna just sit in the back, you know, and learn. And they said, no, you're gonna come to the front and you're gonna take part in these events and you're gonna learn today. And I did. And I met some of my best friends to this day. And so that was one of the things that was told to me when I had that conversation with the chancellor that day. If you don't like it here, well, not necessarily if you don't like it here, but if you see things that you want to change, the best way to do that is to get involved. So I said, challenge accepted. And I got involved in every single thing that I could do until the logical next step was pretty much to run for student body president. This was a big feat at the University of Missouri, considering where I'm from, in addition to my own identities. You have a school of about 36,000 students, with students coming from Kansas City, St. Louis, Denver, Dallas, Chicago, Pennsylvania, over 120 different countries around the world in all 50 states, including our 2 students from Rhode Island. Believe me, I knew them. I was a tour guide too. But for me, I wanted to champion what it meant to be an inclusive leader, right? Because I knew what it felt like to not be included and not feel like I was at the table. And many of you all know the saying that if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. And so that was one of the reasons why I started to engage within my community. In addition to the fact that my sophomore year, I remember I was heading to, it was just 2 weeks after a diversity dinner where our deputy chancellor, our highest black male person on campus, a leadership person on campus, he spoke about his experience as being a student at Mizzou. And while he was there, he remembers somebody shouting at him his freshman year, "Go home, N-word." And that same experience happened to me my sophomore year. And the same scholarship that I had to the University of Missouri, I had to a historically black college. And I remember thinking, I don't have to stay here and put up with this. I don't have to deal with this. I don't have to be here. Because it's also, as much as I want to improve a community, it's not my job to change this entire institution of when we have people who are put in these positions with these resources to make sure that students are educated on ways in which we can all be a part of making change, right? And all be a part of making a society, a campus, and a community that's good for all of us. And so I remember having this deep dialogue, and I said, you know what, I can either leave here or I can make it better. And that was one of the reasons why I said, I think I'm gonna run for president here at Mizzou. Because I remember thinking, I'm like, this is my home. I've invested this time here. I joined these organizations. I've been a diversity peer educator. I've been in all these organizations. I've been advocating for these different communities. I was on the student board to the Alumni Association. Anything Mizzou, black and gold, you can guarantee you could find me at. Because I love my school that much. And more importantly, I love the community around me. And I saw the potential to make it better. So then, an incredible individual, probably the most brilliant person I know, I asked to be my running mate. And this was gonna be an incredible challenge, but we were up to it. Not only was I the black person who was deciding to run for student body presidents, there had only been 2 other black student body presidents since 1839, Mizzou's opening, or whenever they created the actual council. But this was different because the president and the vice president ran together at Mizzou. And this was the first time, if we were elected, that 2 black student leaders would lead the University of Missouri in the fall of 2014. There was a lot going on at this time. Just 2 hours down the road in St. Louis, in Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown was killed by the hands of the police. This polarized our state, this polarized the nation, but more importantly, the thing that was unacceptable to me is that we as a university, as the University of Missouri, weren't taking active steps to have a conversation about it, at the bare minimum. When many of our students, especially those students who look like me, come from Ferguson, Florissant, from St. Louis, from that area. And many of us who still look like those students are affected by the same issues, right? So we made this campaign called Ignite Mizzou. It was based on pride, progress, truth, and vision. And this was going to be the campaign of all campaigns to make sure that every student felt like they had a voice within our student government. And this was a big deal. This wasn't just any student government. This was a student government with a $1.7 million budget, a radio station, a TV station, a safe ride program, a craft studio, 8 professional staff, an entire department of student activities that we were running from the student government, which meant that we had to make sure that students knew what they were putting their money towards. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to run. So Brenda and I were elected. And as you all probably have noticed, Brenda is sitting right here. She joined me on this trip. We were elected at Mizzou. And while it was an incredible time for the spirit of Mizzou, considering how we were elected, so many different communities came together, the communities that we united, from the PHA community, from the National Panhellenic Council community. So I'm an Alpha Phi Alpha. So that was really cool to see all of these different communities that we were able to bring together in order to bring this vision about igniting Mizzou. And we decided that we would get every single vote that we could until we had the highest voter turnout in the history of the student government at Mizzou, because more people voted for us than they voted in the Missouri House of Representatives, right? And people told us that we wouldn't get elected. I remember having one conversation with one guy. He said, "You won't get elected. Like, you're a great guy, you can speak well and all that, but you're a minority, and minorities don't vote, so they're not gonna vote for you. I mean, like, you're best better off being a vice president if you can, or just trying to be on somebody's cabinet or something like that. Like, you two, like, while you all are great together, you probably just don't have a chance. You're not even from Missouri." Both of us aren't even from Missouri. She's from Brunswick, Georgia, and I'm from Chicago. So there were a lot of different questions and a lot of people who doubted us. But there were so many more people who said that you can do this, I'm supporting you. Random people who we didn't even know started handing out coffee. We would come back to our campaign table every single day and it was somebody random there. When a lot of times we couldn't even count on the people who we thought we would be able to count on to run. Because you think that people have your back and then you try to do something to get to the next level in life and you will learn quickly who your friends are, who your family is, right? So we got elected. And being elected many times, people think that that is the most difficult part. The most difficult part is doing the job, right? Doing the job that you set out to do while keeping your integrity, while keeping the people around you not happy, but at least satisfied with the fact that they know that you are doing your best every single day that you walk in and out of that office. Fall of 2015 rolls around after a tumultuous year in 2014 of die-ins and sit-ins and protests that Brenda and I participated in. Because the first thing that we were told when we were handed our transition binders as we assumed office on January 20th in 2015, the president before us said not to make a stance on Ferguson. She said, "You're just gonna polarize the community. It's too political. We don't want anything out there about this." And so I just remember thinking, what an incredible privilege that must be to not have to weigh in on the conversation at all. To say that this isn't important, or this conversation is too polarizing, or that we just shouldn't be speaking about this as student leaders, even if our university didn't speak out about it at all, right? And universities are created to be marketplaces of ideas in order to move society forward. However way forward in which you see viewing it, making sure, like, not talking about the issues that are most pressing to our society is not how we move forward. That's actually how we regress. So 2015 rolls around. We have a year of inaction, a year of us pressuring our administration, not only to make a statement on the things that were happening in Ferguson, but to also recognize that we had some issues at our campus that we needed to address as well. It's issues related to systemic oppression. And it's this idea that we still are living through the issues and the barriers that are put in place based upon how we became to be a nation in the first place. And I say this because a lot of people get up in arms about that. They're just like, oh my gosh, like you're not patriotic, you don't love this country and blah, 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 blah. No, like if you truly love something and you truly care about something being better, you know the full history. And when you know that context, it empowers you to make sure that it's better. I have no problem saying that I understand that this country was built on the genocide of one people and the slavery of another. And if you can't say that, and you don't know that that's the foundation and the economic foundation on which you stand upon today, the economic foundation that supports this town, the economic foundation that supports the entire United States of America, then I don't think you're patriotic because you don't know the real history of your country, right? But we're talking about moving forward. You can't move forward if you don't acknowledge the past. And so because of that, as somebody who loved my university, who was the biggest cheerleader for my university, always posing with the mascot, hanging out, homecoming king, all that full 9 yards, I love me some Mizzou. But I knew that it was founded in 1839. I knew that women weren't accepted into the university until 1867, white women. I knew that slavery was abolished in 1865. I knew that it wasn't until 1950 that the first black student was admitted to the University of Missouri. These are what I carried with me every single day when I stepped into my office. And I realized that knowing this context was fuel for me to help understand where we made some of our shortcomings so that we could address them in order to move forward. In the fall of 2015, the same thing happened to me again as I talked about being confronted with basically racism. And I went about it differently. I didn't just say, well, you know, this situation happened, I'm gonna run for president. Because the first time it happened, I'm like, this happens to people all the time. Like, who am I to make a big fuss out of it? I'm just gonna go with it and make things better. But this time I was infuriated because it felt like I was putting in so much work to make the community better. And I just felt like everybody was just walking around, you know, in their leggings and their Starbucks and Chipotle, just being basic. And I mean, I like Chipotle every now and then, but it just really felt like it was just business as usual. When we want to talk about equality and the importance of it, and equity and the importance of it, and people who look like me get gunned down in the streets, and we don't do anything about it. We say that's just America. It becomes a hashtag, and it's just business as usual. And I remember sitting in this meeting where I represented the University of Missouri amongst our other campuses from Kansas City and St. Louis. And I was the only person of color in there. And the issue of whether we should bring the fact that DACA students paid 3 times as much money to go to Missouri system schools to the legislature, to the Missouri State Legislature came up. And I was the only one who thought that that was something that we should bring to the Missouri legislature to address. During this incident last night, I sat in a meeting after I was outvoted, and I wrote this letter. And it was more for myself to let out my frustration, but I was in the age of social media, so I put it on Facebook. And I will read it to you. It does have explicit language in it, so if you do feel the need to check out mentally, emotionally, psychologically, physically, you are more than welcome to do so. But I will read this language to you all, okay? Warning, explicit language. I just want to say how extremely hurt and disappointed I am. Last night as I was walking through campus, some guys riding on the back of a pickup truck decided that it would be okay to continuously scream nigger at me. I really just want to know why my simple existence is such a threat to society. For those of you who wonder why I'm always talking about the importance of inclusion and respect, it's because I've experienced moments like this multiple times at this university, making me not feel included here. Many of you are so privileged that you'll never know what it feels like to be a hijab-wearing Muslim woman and be called a terrorist or a towel head. You don't have to think about being transgender and worrying about finding a restroom where you can go and not be targeted for violence because you don't fit into the gender binary. You'll never know what it feels like to see Memorial Union every day and then to the side like a second-class citizen, because after 90 years, there's still no accessible way to enter the tower. You've never been spit on walking down 9th Street, or misgendered at Pizza Tree because they called out your birth name. You've never had to experience people throwing drinks on you and yelling faggot at you from the patio at Big 12 as you walk past on the street holding hands with your partner. You might never have to think twice about what you're wearing walking around campus at night so that someone won't think it's okay to take ownership of your body because your outfit was asking for it. If your simple existence is not a political statement, I'm really going to need for you to check your privilege. These are some of my experiences and the experiences of the ones closest to me. This is what I'm fighting against every day in boardrooms, conferences, meetings, classrooms, the Capitol, and in my daily life. This is my reality. Is it weird that I think that I have the right to feel safe here too? If you see violence like this and you don't say anything, yes, you are a part of the problem. It's the reason why it's on us. Black lives matter. Trans rights are human rights. And love is fucking love. If you want to fight for social change at Mizzou, there are so many different outlets. Apply to be a diversity peer educator. Stop by any of our wonderful centers of social justice. Educate yourselves and others. Hold your family, friends, fraternity brothers, and sorority sisters accountable. And if this post made you feel uncomfortable, good. That means I'm doing my job. It's time to wake up Mizzou. Your nigger, faggot, Missouri Students Association President, Payton Head. I imagine for a lot of you all that this made you feel uncomfortable, right? It sucks sometimes, but I think that we grow the most when we become comfortable with being uncomfortable. When we understand that that is how growth and change happens. It always has. When I use the terminology privilege, certain people thought that I was targeting a specific group. The people who I was targeting the most with this message wasn't necessarily the perpetrators of this, right? It was the people who see things like this and just walk away like they didn't see anything. When you see somebody being harassed in the streets, when you see something happening and you don't say anything, your silence is compliance. And I believe that education is so important, and that's one of the reasons why I said there are so many centers of education that we have here. This is an educational institution, right? But there's so many different ways in which we can get education from one another. This was on September 12th in 2015. The difference that this kind of calls from the first time it happened to me is not only did I make this public, but there was a different role that I occupied, right? I wasn't just Payton Head, the black kid from Chicago at this point. I was Payton Head, the student body president at the University of Missouri. And so I posted this, went about my day, went to bed, woke up in the morning with thousands of shares and calls from the Washington Post and PBS and all of these different places because apparently it was a big deal that like racism was a thing on college campuses. And mind you now, like we're post-2016, so like you all are engaging in these dialogues, right? We've had women's marches and all that kind of stuff, but this was different. This was 2015. Obama was president, so people thought racism just didn't exist anymore. They're like, what are you talking about? You got one in, like, you have nothing else to overcome. Y'all have overcame. You got the White House, shut up. No, that is not how it went down. This was big news. And big time news in Missouri as well. And it ended up being a frame as to how the media started to frame all of the conversations happening at Mizzou. Because while Mizzou in this year, for those of y'all who are in higher ed who were following along in 2015, which was a big deal for a lot of higher ed professionals as they were watching how Mizzou grappled with this situation, they started painting Mizzou, the articles that would come out, Mizzou, a hotbed of racial harassment and all this kind of stuff. Mizzou was not a hotbed of racial harassment. America is a hotbed of racial harassment. And just because, and just because you don't see it, and just because it's not in the news, because somebody with privilege, right? Somebody with the privilege of having a platform on which to stand, a microphone on which to speak, to bring these issues to you all, right? Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And it doesn't mean that you should invalidate it as well for any of these situations. And so here's what started to happen after this. This was a major catalyst for 2015 because it started one of the first demonstrations on campus led by a powerful graduate student at the time, Danielle Walker. And she created an activist group on campus called Racism Lives Here. And the idea is, racism lives here, but so do we. And that was the tagline, and that's what she told. And here's her boyfriend in the back holding up his recognize my white privilege sign and supporting future wife. They're engaged now. It's like actually beautiful. But these are some of the things that started to happen. It got very, very tense on campus as we were challenging our administration. And many of these things may sound new to some of you, but these conversations have been going on for so long. We stand on the shoulders of so many people who have come before us. I just happen to be a vessel who has the opportunity and the privilege to be able to share this story with you when so many people were involved. Walkouts, there were sit-ins, there were study-ins at the university where we worked with graduate students and we worked with all type of stakeholders, professors, we worked with community members. So many different people came together to make sure that this galvanized the amount of attention it deserved to show that a change needed to come, not only to Mizzou, but to America. This was one of the more difficult parts. In the middle of all of this, a group rose called #ConcernedStudent1950, and you can follow the hashtags in the accounts if you want to see. Concerned student was those of us who were all concerned, just like a concerned citizen. 1950, 1950 signified the very first black student that was admitted to the University of Missouri, Gus T. Ridgel, who is still living today. A graduate student decided to embark on a hunger strike after a homecoming demonstration where students had been trying to get in touch with the system president at the time and say, these are some of the issues that are happening here. Before this demonstration where Concerned Student 1950 locked arms in front of the president's car during the homecoming parade, multiple emails and requests for meetings have been sent out. Because the first thing when students organize and activate, basically, that they tell you is, did you follow the bureaucracy? Did you meet with the appropriate people? Did you go to your dean of student affairs? Did you do this? Did you? Yes, all of that was done, right? But what happens when it's just simply not enough? When you say that these are the issues and people say, oh, well, okay, we'll wait you out. When cotton balls are placed in front of your Black Culture Center, and the university writes it off as littering. These are some of the issues that students, especially graduate students who had spent substantial time at this institution, had seen for a long time. And this is what bubbled up into creating a mass-scale movement. People were empowered from all different backgrounds to come together. That lady right there, that's my twin sister. This guy ran against me. Lex over here started an incredible blog called Meditated Melanin that you all can follow now, where she documented a lot of what it felt like to be here in this time. Ana Gutierrez, who was president of the Latinx Graduate Student Organization, and Jen Sanders, one of our directors of our residence halls on campus. It wasn't just students. A lot of the media that you see about this story shows that college students now are crybabies. They're whiners. They don't know what they're talking about. They just want everything to be catered towards them, and they don't want to listen to other sides. That is not how this worked. I grew up my whole life listening to the other side. It's time for us to come to a mutual understanding of what listening means, right? And how listening translates to action. Many of us came together, and there was a lot more going on. A lot of people think that, based off of the pictures and everything, that everything was all fine and dandy, and it wasn't. It just wasn't. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to be not necessarily always on the same page, but to have an idea of what is it that you're fighting for? Because there is necessarily, not all the time is there going to be an enemy, right? But there are people who recognize that there are certain changes that need to be made in order to move us forward. And that is what was going on here. There was a wide presence of media, including this cute little kid in the back, from the community, and different people who came out to campus to get this story. But one of the reasons why I show this picture, because I think it's very important for us to talk about cultural competency and how that relates all across the different sectors. A lot of times people think that one diversity course is a fix-all, right, to all of the issues facing students and moving into society. No, diversity should be ingrained into your curriculum at every single point of it, because it affects how we deal with these issues. I would love for us one day to not have to have a conversation about Black women and maternity and mortality rates, because diversity is a required teaching within nursing and within our medical programs all across the country, right? And it's not just some one class that you go in that's an elective, as a part of some university-wide program, which is a start. But it's important to recognize that these issues that we may think are all these different categories are ingrained into all of the work that we do everywhere. For journalism, it's important for you, our storytellers out here, to make sure that you are telling a full story. Because his story, oftentimes, is his story, right? So what are you doing to make sure that your story that you put out is accurate? And that was some of the issues that we were dealing with. I don't know if any of you all have heard of Kamala Harris, and recently they wrote an article about people screeching at her and saying bad things or whatever, but it was actually her sorority sisters cheering her on. And that's the oldest Black sorority in the nation. And somebody with cultural competency would have known that sorority produced leaders like Coretta Scott King and Rosa Parks, and that this ski-wee that they were doing was in celebration of their sister, and they weren't just screeching at a senator because they didn't like her, right? So that's just one small story to tell you the importance of taking the time to learn something that's different. And this can happen in many different ways, right? There are hardcore steps that you all can take to do this. Actionable steps. And sometimes that means stepping outside of your comfort zone. For me, coming to Mizzou was a step outside of my comfort zone. Going to my first Unification Asian Association meeting was a step outside of my comfort zone, because I was like, oh, well, I don't know anybody in here. I don't look like nobody in here. But I went to one of those events and I fell in love, not only just with the plethora of cultures that were presented there, but just the way in which I was treated and welcomed into the community. And I'm not saying go to everybody's org meetings all the time, because many times those are like sacred spaces. But if somebody's having an event on campus, go. Because that's them showcasing, and they're saying, this is what I'm showcasing to you for my community, and I'm welcoming you in. That doesn't mean sit around and wonder if you're going to be the only white person there. Hell, that happens all the time, right? Because I remember one time I invited one of my white friends to one of the events happening at the Black Culture Center, and they're just like, will I be the only white person there? I was like, well, I'm the only Black person at all of these events. So why don't you come and take a step outside of your comfort zone and see what's going on? And they had a great time. And that led to different dialogues that we started to having with different fraternities. My fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, is a historically Black fraternity. And we had an event with Delta Chi on campus. And all of the different misconceptions that were had, like some people thought that my fraternity was all just about like stepping and all that. I'm like, no, we do way more than all of that, considering I don't have rhythm. So you won't see me out there doing all this, because it's just, we do so much more. And so when you take the time to get out of your different niches, you can build a community here, but you can also branch out, right? You can see what this college has to afford you, and that's one of the beauties of being in this place. Less than 20% of people in this entire country have access to higher education in the first place. That means they don't have access to conversations like this. They don't have access to the classes that you're going in every day, or the fully funded resources and programs that you all have to support things like convocations, right? So what responsibility do you all have now that you're in this space? And I think it means trying to figure out a way to coexist, number one. But more importantly, how that coexisting can lead to moving forward and creating change. And this is what we were able to see. So I'm not the person who's just the one with empty complaints about my university. I show this picture to help you all just get a little bit of a picture. As much as lighthearted as I've made this conversation, our lives were at stake for a lot of this. This was national and international news. We had BBC, Al Jazeera, ESPN, any news media outlet that you could think of in the country was at Mizzou at this time. People were calling in. Our Black Culture Center got bomb threats. My cabinet got death threats. There were so many different things that were moving at once. And one of the reasons why I called the police was to let them know that our Black Culture Center was receiving threats that they had known of. They told me that they would put a 24-hour surveillance on this center, yet somebody was able to spray paint black off of this, which showed me how serious we were taking these issues at this time. In the middle of all of our pain, there were lessons that we learned about joy within solidarity, right? And that was one thing that I remember learning from this movement, even if everybody didn't get along all the time. This is Ayanna right here standing on the table here in our main academic hall. This is Sam. He was a tour guide with me, great guy. He's probably just like, hey, Ayanna, what's going on? I'm here at work, but this protest is cool. He's a great guy, by the way, you know, like however you're taking this picture. But I'm just showing you like what it was like to be on campus at this time. And in the same building, Jesse Hall, which houses our chancellor's office and all of our administration, we would sit there and we would do study-ins, and graduate students would teach their classes. Those who were learning sociology and peace studies. There were many professors who said, I'm not entertaining what's going on out there on campus. That is a mess. But there were other people, other professors, as I talk about the role of faculty, right, who got together and said, this is a learning experience. Because they knew that in that moment, we were living history. That's just a random picture. I don't know how they got it there. This was one of the days where we eventually saw the resignations of our leadership. And there's so many backstories. I wish I could get to everything, but you all will be here all day. But I think this was a moment, while it might have been a win for many, it was also just a terrifying moment, right? Because we had to figure out what was happening next. What did this mean next for the future of our school? When I talk about the power of having privilege, right? The power of using your platform, this is something that we're seeing now more than ever today. And it's the power of college athletes, right? The power of athletes when they come together and they use their voice. One of the biggest catalysts in this movement that was started and sustained by queer Black women was when these men joined in and said that they would not play until the student ate again. And this was a big deal. While many people are just like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, it's the football team. Well, that was my idea. Like, the football team said that they were gonna get involved, and I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, they were bringing water to the campsite to support students and all that. I'm like, okay, we have water, thanks. But then my frat brother tweeted this picture. This is the entire Missouri football team. Right here, in this blue-looking purple shirt, whatever you want to call it, periwinkle, is the coach. For those of y'all who know how these big state schools work, your football coach is the highest paid person in the state. He has coins. He has his whiteness. He's good. He didn't have to sit there and support these students, but he did. And I think that's one of the lessons that I want you all to take away. You may think that your voice doesn't matter. You may think that you don't have the language or the terminology to speak on behalf of different communities. It's not about speaking up for people, right? People have their own voices. It's not about speaking up for people. It's about elevating the voices of those who are most marginalized and minoritized. The ones who've been saying, I've been saying this over and over and over again. I don't need you to speak up for me. I don't need you to speak over me. I need you to elevate my voice. Use your platform and your voice as a microphone for these issues. And that's what he did in this moment. And this was a true game changer because $1 million was on the line if we forfeited that game coming up that weekend. In the meantime, while the press was putting all these messages about Mizzou being, like I said, the hotbed of racial harassment and all that kind of stuff, and this whiners and these kids are coddled and all that other kind of stuff, the students from universities all across the world, from the Fees Must Fall movement in South Africa, from Poland, from Chile, they were messaging us and sending us posters and pictures and tweeting and building a whole movement on social media that people did not even expect. And it came from everywhere to show that it wasn't just Mizzou that was the issue. It was everywhere. And we have a nation and a world to change. And these are students here at the University of Alabama. These are the students here at Yale University, Nevada. I believe that's the University of Tennessee. This is our executive cabinet at the time. And this is the letter that we submitted to support our students, which was difficult. It was 2 a.m. We were sitting in the education school, and we had to figure out what we could do to make a stance for our students. At this time, we tried to remain as unbiased as possible as a student government, but use our individual voices, right? But there's a difference between right and wrong, and what we were witnessing was wrong. And so this letter here called for the resignation of our leadership. And we eventually saw that. Jonathan was able to eat again. I love this picture because this is me and Bryn over here. This is Ida over here who came from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And she arranged an entire demonstration and brought us out there when we felt like we had no support from around the state. She got the Kansas City campus on board. This was our president's picture at the White House. And this was a big deal. I don't know do we have any Alabama people here?
Auburn University.
Okay, Auburn, okay. Perfect. We had Rod Bridges, student body president at Ole Miss, who later went on that year to work with his chapter of the NAACP on campus to have the Confederate flag removed from the University of Mississippi. Elliot Spillers, the first black president at the University of Alabama in 40 years, who fought machine politics to get to where he is. His story is incredible if you hear about what he had to go through to get where he was. And we had Walker Bird, who was president of Auburn University. And it showed the incredible power of solidarity, right? This incredible power of coming together, because you can't do any of this stuff on your own. And if you think you can, no, it doesn't work that way. We also have to understand that we need to stop viewing activism with this messianic approach, right? That one person is just gonna come out, save us all. Because even the people who were supporting Martin Luther King, there was a whole movement behind him. And a movement doesn't happen if people don't move. Each person who was involved, the people who put up the flyers for the bus boycotts, the people who put up the flyers around DC and made the sandwiches and the lunches for the March on Washington, those people matter. Their stories matter. Their activism mattered. And even now, and I'll conclude in a second, we talk about activism, right? Because it's trendy. Everybody wants to be an activist. But in order to be an activist, you have to act, right? You also have to understand that it happens in so many different ways, right? There's not one way to go out and do it. We had multiple different things happening at once, which is one of the reasons why I think that our movement in many ways was successful. I think where we failed and where we had shortcomings was for some of us not realizing the importance of everybody's involvement in some kind of way. I know you all have Green Dot on campus, and that motto is not everyone can do everything, but everyone can do something. So as I leave you all today, I'm going to leave you with one more quote by Martin Luther King, and I'm going to challenge you to find your something. Here's this quote. The Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not in the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but to the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. And I believe that this applies not just to white people, right? But it applies to all of us who are silenced in the midst of oppression. All of us who don't take the time to use our voices when we know we can. All of us who see something but don't say something. Those of us who think that all of this order that we think that we have now is going to save us. Those of us who think that just because this situation is not my situation, I'm going to turn the other way. So I challenge you all today to find your something as you all move forward. And I thank you all so much for your time.
Okay, I hate to cut the applause, but if you did not get a chance to sign in, please do sign in outside. The sign-in sheets are at the table. So there are a couple of announcements that I need to make, and then we're going to let Payton take some questions. Yeah? So we wanted to, well, our students wanted to be able to thank you for this talk, but also for your graciousness all day and talking with them. What I can say that I've observed is that you have been incredibly honest about what it really means to do the work, right? The costs, the benefits, individually and collectively. And so we're going to have some thank yous by our students. And Brenda, if you wouldn't mind coming up too, because you've been really gracious with us all day.
All right, so some of you know and some of you don't know, but as a Juniata campus to Black and brown students here and other communities, this actually means a lot, right? We've been having a lot of incidences on campus, and we've been coming out and showing y'all why it matters to be a Black or brown student. And I hope you see today why it actually matters for us on this campus to be a Black or brown student. So to do that, you know, we had to be a little extra, and we made certificates with all or most of our student leaders on it, just to thank you and say we appreciate the both of you for coming, and we really, really, really do. We appreciate it so much. So, yeah, go ahead.
So we're going to invite questions. I would ask that you please use the microphone, even if you think that you have the most fabulous and loud voice. We want to make sure that we are being inclusive and that everyone can hear the questions that you're asking. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have questions, go to either of the aisles and use the microphone. We're eager to take your questions.
Yeah, so like, I'm taking like a nonviolence class this semester, so like just looking through that lens, you seem to have like a very nonviolent movement with like hunger strikes and the camping and that sort of thing. Was there any like violent moments like when things got really heated and physical, and did you do like any training to like make sure people remained nonviolent?
Ooh. Great question. There were a lot of heated exchanges, but nothing to my knowledge that got like extremely physical. Like there were threats, a lot of threats of it getting to that level. And yes, there was training. A lot of the student activists worked in, and there's different terminology and different things that are used in ways that go about advocacy. So like the whole purpose of allies, right? When you have a march, like having white bodies on the outside and having black bodies on the inside, because we're politicized in a different way and the police interact with us in a different way. So those are some of the things that we learned in ways in which to de-escalate situations and not engage.
Do you have any like tips or suggestions for those trainings?
Not necessarily right now. If you email me, I can find you some resources. But I would definitely look online. It definitely varies across different situations where you are, whatever the protest, whatever the demonstration is about. Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem. Yes. Melissa. Yeah. Ooh. Okay. This situation. Whew. Okay, so there was an incident on campus where it did get physical. And this was when a professor was involved. There was a journalist who was there, Tim Tai. I believe they go by different identities now. But they were getting rough with students. They had entered the student space, and they were pushing students out in and out of the way in order to get their story. For me, I think it's incredibly important for this story to be captured, right? For journalists to be there and be present and get the story. But when you're putting your hands on students and moving people in every which way in order to gain access to your source or your story or whatever, after people have refused to interview with you, then that's an issue, right? Professor Melissa Click at the time is the one who was caught on, and I usually have a slide that I talk about her, but I already went over time today. She called for more muscle. And when she called for muscle in this, all of a sudden she became the demonized poster child for being against freedom of speech and freedom and the First Amendment rights on college campuses. So now you see the creation of these organizations like Turning Point USA and all these different groups that are just like, remember Mizzou and remember Melissa Click. And the way that she was portrayed in the media after that, like they had reddened up her hair and putting her, like made her glasses all pointy. Like they had done all of these different things to make her look like a character, to make her this enemy of First Amendment rights. And that's a situation in which it did get physical. And that was one of the issues in which we were dealing with. But at that moment, there were no students who were trying to fight him, like them. Nobody was trying to fight that person, that journalist at the time. They were just like, we need you to be out of this space at this time. Professor Click calling for muscle in order to, have help with making sure that students were safe. In addition to our director of Greek life at the time, they were put in very compromising situations when the media decided to portray this as these staff members and this faculty member were against First Amendment rights on campus. And it's interesting, like I talk about the power of story and the power of history and cultural competency and everything. If you capture a story in a certain way, if you have your story written in a way already and you put it out there and it gets put out there, it can quickly become a narrative. So we always have to challenge the narratives in which we are presenting. And that's one of the reasons why people have, there's an entire documentary out there right now about Ferguson and what really went on from the activists and the people who were present there. Because the media that a lot of you all saw was people burning up a Quick Trip, right? That was the biggest thing that came out of Ferguson in terms of narrative and media, right? But the entirety of the marches, of the protests in Ferguson were people holding hands, people crying, and people trying to find ways in which to heal with one another. So I think it's very, very challenging when you are in situations like that. Yeah. So that was the only one situation that I think I can remember, to my knowledge, that I didn't remember at the time, where things did escalate. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hey.
So I have a question about what you think about like the canceled culture that we kind of live in now.
Mm-hmm.
So like when someone does something in their past that's like racist or sexist or offensive in any way, and then that's kind of dug up through social media or through pictures to any means, how you think, maybe I guess, do you think the way that we're going about it as like a community, as a society, is a good way? Should we be forgiving people? How do we do that? And how you think like that kind of situation should be approached?
That's a great question. We are in the age of cancel culture, and we were talking about this at lunch today. Mm-hmm. To be completely honest with you, I think that people get canceled a little too quickly around here. How can I put this? I think when there's an opportunity for learning and growth, and there's multiple opportunities presented and they're not taken, and what you're saying and what you're doing is causing harm to another communities, I think that sometimes having shaming out there and shunning is important, so that people can learn a lesson that certain behavior should not be tolerated and is not okay, right? But I think that we also have to get to a point in society where it's just like, there has to be a way for people to understand the importance of like learning from these interactions with one another, right? And I think that there has to be some kind of space for healing. And so because all of us can be canceled for something, right? Nobody, name one, if there's one person in here that has never done anything that you are ashamed of and that you are wrong in your life, please raise your hand now. Right? So, I say all that to say, I think that when we don't take the time to learn from our mistakes, when we aren't thoughtful about our apologies and about our approach to saying that this is what we've learned from this situation and this is why we're not going to do this again, I think that's when things can get sticky. But I think that we have to be very, very careful as we're moving forward with this cancel culture, because you could get canceled. Hell, I could get canceled for saying something up here and wouldn't even know it. So that's one of the reasons why I think that it's important for us to take the time to educate ourselves on the things in which we can, right? So that you're not constantly doing this. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have institutions of higher learning with equity offices and diversity and inclusion offices that should be, fully resourced, right? That should also promote diverse learning within the faculty. And that's one of the reasons why I had an issue with my institution, because I said it was not necessarily always happening just random students saying mean things or whatever to each other. It's not always, people always saying, it's just people saying mean things to each other, brush them off, get a thicker skin, get over it. But these mean things or whatever, are representative of a culture that can lead to pain, that can lead to harm, that can lead to death. And those are the things that we aren't necessarily talking about in the classroom. So it's even looking at the ways in which our institutions are set up. If you have a provost office, and they're the ones with all the power over the faculty, right? And there's nobody in there to make sure that there is institutional equity ingrained into the curriculum that you're producing into the world, because you're graduating people and matriculating people into the world. And they're gonna have trouble getting jobs and sustaining jobs now, with this cancel culture existing, if they're not getting adequate information, right? So these things should be taught not only at our collegiate levels, but they should be taught in our K through 12 education. How do we work with one another? How do we live with one another? All that kind of stuff. So sorry that was a long answer, but in short, I think that we got to do better overall with cancel culture. I think that people need more resources to learn. People have to be willing to learn. In addition to, we also got to give some people some leniency sometimes. And I think those are people within the community who we know have proven to have good intentions. Right? Because we say it's not about intent, it's about impact. So if you're willing to say, this is the impact that I had, And I apologize for it, even though it was not my intention. You know, I think that we have to get better with that. And that's a whole, I wish I knew the broad answer to that because that was a very, very long answer to your question. But those are some of my thoughts on it. Hey.
My name is Juan Martinez, man. Honestly, it's been really empowering. Thank you. Juniata has an issue with retention rates for people who look like me, men that look like me. And I don't know, it's just, I'm stuck between jumping ship and going back to the city and staying back here and like, you know, doing this. And I just, I don't know, I haven't really been shown, you know, leadership or really any, I guess, any figures, you know. First person I learned about was Christopher Columbus. You know, Christopher Columbus, George Washington, white figures. I never learned about a Hispanic hero, you know, anything like that. And I just was stuck between going back home and like, you know, staying here. So it's just like, it's not just for me, but like people just like me, they'll come in next year, the year after that. And like kids that are still like, you know, stuck between this because it's harder for us, I guess, to adjust to up here. What's your advice?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
Can you clarify one thing for me? In terms of advice, what do you mean, like in terms of an institutional approach or as like, just in general for you, like staying here?
I don't know, man. It's just both, actually.
Like, let me know.
Honestly, like, because we had a conversation with Dr. G, and it was just like, it's true. For us, it's harder to open up. And I guess, you know, we have that connection that, you know, we are, we don't open up. As men, we don't open up. So I just want to know, like, for me as a man and as a student at the school.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay. Whew. Y'all are hitting the hard hitters today. So I personally cannot tell you what to do in terms of leaving or staying, because that's ultimately up to you after you weigh out the decisions as to what is best for you, right? For me, at my institution, the reason why I was able to stay, the reason why I was able to have to see success in some kind of way and build a movement was because I had a support system. And that's one thing that we don't talk about. Like I said, it's not this whole messianic approach. You all may see Payton Head on the flyers today, but it wasn't Payton Head who was leading all of this. Payton Head just happened to be the student body president who took a stance on some things that may have been controversial, who has one of the biggest names coming out of this. But there were so many different people who were supporting me, so many people who were uplifting me, you know, and so many different people around me, because not only that I have that community that existed, I also created it in many ways, because I said, I have to survive here some kind of way. There were certain things that I didn't like on campus. I didn't like how every now and then, at least my freshman year, I know things have changed now from what I hear from students. When I walked into the Black Culture Center, I often felt like there was a lot of homophobia. And then when I went to the LGBTQ Resource Center, there was a lot of racist things said. I was like, how are y'all racist? Like, what is... it just didn't make sense to me, right? So I started to try to kind of pick and choose what I wanted to be a part of that created the community that I needed to succeed in the middle of Missouri as a boy from Chicago, right? Because in my area, even when I lived in the city, in the suburbs and all that, it was always all black. It's not saying that I didn't branch out, that I didn't go different places and I saw other people, but my high school, you look out, like everybody looked like me. So going to Mizzou was a big step out of my comfort zone, but I remember the very first program that I enrolled in at Mizzou that kept me there, that gave me a support system the moment I got on campus, was the Mizzou Black Men's Initiative. And that's one of the reasons why I think student affairs is one of the most important vehicles and engines that you have to grow change on campus, because it has the ability to foster a community here for people. So I think that takes time to look at the programs that we have here in place and what is in place to make sure that there is empowerment for people who look like you and who look like us, to make sure that you are successful on this campus, right? And I think that's just one part of it. And I'm not going to tell you to leave, and I'm not going to tell you to stay. I think you have to ultimately do what's best for you. But I believe in higher education as an institution, if we are committed to bringing you here, we need to be just as committed to making sure that you walk across that stage, right?
Hi, so I'm an RA on campus, and last week we had I guess you would call it like a staff meeting about, diversity and POC that come into the dorms. So in a presentation, we had made a comment about how most POC that are coming into the school already are going to have that feeling like there's not going to be anyone there for them, or that there's people against them, especially within the dorms or like on the campus. You had also said that the reason that you were able to stay at your university was because you felt like a level of support. I was just asking if you could kind of expand a bit more on the importance of having professors and faculty member that look like us, because I feel like that's an issue we have here, is like we need more professors and more people that interact with us that look like us, because for a lot of people here, it's the difference between whether they stay or they leave. And I think that's something that we need here. So.
Yeah. That's an important question. Thank you. And that's not just a here thing, too. That's across the board in higher ed. And I think that one of the reasons why I was able to be successful, I came into Mizzou and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be a poli-sci major. And I was just sick of like sitting in these classes that were just about like how white men sat around and created America. So I ended up getting a minor in Black Studies from the university. And I had a Black faculty member who was chair of the department, Dr. Shonikin, who, like, we would sit in class, we would talk about Africa, we would talk about America, we would talk about the diaspora, we would talk about all these different things. So I had some kind of outlet in an academic way to not only talk about the things that were happening on campus, but just things that were important and relevant, not only to American society, but me living as I am, who I am in this society. And I think that's one of the reasons why you need diverse faculty at every single level within all of these different types of programs, because your faculty can tell you so many different things about basically how to survive in the field that you're doing. But a lot of times if you don't see somebody who looks like you, it's not as easy. They can't speak to your experience all the time. And I say that now because institutions, they always, they want to claim eliteness and everything. But I'm like, if your institution isn't representative, then it's not incredible. I go to University of Chicago. They pride themselves on being top 5 school, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Yet I'm studying international development, and I go to take an African development class that's taught not only by a white man, but there are no African authors on the syllabus. Right? And my school is supposed to be one of the standards of excellence, right? So I think that across the board, we have to start having these conversations about representation and the narrative that comes when you have faculty who can come in and let you know what's going on. And I think it's important too for the faculty development, right? For everybody around. Because I think what faculty do is so important. You are shaping the minds of individuals who will leave and go out into the workforce and do whatever they can to contribute to the world. What does it mean to make sure that you have colleagues who look different than you, who you can have conversations with about certain issues and how they're affecting society? I think that would have looked different at my school, if we had more diverse faculty in the meantime who could help some of these department heads understand what was happening at the university and why, instead of shying away from these conversations as a department, that their teachers and these professors need to be out there seeing what is happening as history was being written on my campus, right? So I think that there's an incredible wealth that diverse faculty bring to the conversation. And I know that university structures have difficulty with recruiting and everything, but if you want it, you figure it out. If it's one of your institutional values, you figure it out, right? Anybody else? How's everybody doing? Y'all are still here? Y'all are still with me? Y'all are great. Hey.
Hey, okay, so I'm an international student, and I'm involved with the student activism movement that goes on campus here. And one of the concerns and kind of like problems we've had is that we don't have as much support in terms of faculty and staff to help us maintain this movement and maintain the momentum. So especially over time, we end up kind of burning out and it ends up falling flat. So what advice would you give us in terms of like the students and on like an institutional level to allow the momentum to continue to build and initiate actual like sustainable change?
Ooh, that is an incredible question. Okay, so for the student leadership portion of this question, students, those of you all who are activists, those of you all who are pushing for institutional change, you cannot be the only ones doing what you do because you leave, right? You eventually graduate. That's what we want. We want you to graduate. We want you to matriculate, go out into the world, do incredible things, continue your advocacy all around the country, all around the world. But if you're not developing somebody to come after you and continue this work, then you drop the ball, right? when you're in college, when you have 4 years, 2 years, 3 years, however long you are in school, you think that this time will go forever. You think that going back and forth from class, going to these org meetings and all this other kind of stuff will last forever. And I'm here to tell you that it goes by very quick. I turned 25 March 1st, and I have just looked back and I'm like, I'm still telling this story. And college was like now, like 4 or 5 years ago, right? It goes by quickly, you know, and things change. So you have to make sure that you are empowering the people who come after you to continue to do this work. And I think that's important too, because sometimes the spotlight looks great. Sometimes it feels great to like be the one voice, but you have to make sure that you're developing and elevating the voices of the ones who come after you, because that's what the work looks like. Like I said, when I came here, I didn't do any of this all by myself. I stand on the shoulders of so many people who have come before me, you know, from my own parents, from the activists and the people that we had protesting on my campus in the 50s and the 60s, and those protesting the Vietnam War, and so much. Our movement was built on that. Everything that we do is built on who has brought something before us. So I think that's one part of it, student side. Okay, institutional side. I think that if an institution, as part of their core values, says that they value equity, inclusion, diversity, or whatever, then it needs to show. And it needs to align with the budget as well, right? What do we value? Because we can say we value everything. Because I was on the budget committee. No, I would pop in those budget committee meetings. Brenda was on the budget committee. Brenda ran the budget and would have to sit on the university budget committee. So she could see, like, okay, well, we could spend $1 million here and $3 million over there and $4 million over here and $1 million over here. But what is happening with our social justice centers? Why are we seeing less events? Like, why are we telling people to do this? Like, where are our staff, right? Like, where are all these people? So I think that if you say that you value these issues, then there needs to be people, and this is all across the field too. If you have a counseling center on campus, we have one black person in our counseling center, and we had a movement that went international. Can you imagine the strain that was put on Renee? Because she was the one who was designated to deal with the mental health of those of us who were receiving death threats and all kind of things, and dealing with a country that was lashing back at us for calling it out for what it is and asking for it to be better and demanding that it would be better. She had to deal with that. In addition to the staff that are put in place too. You can be a black staff at a university and you think that, oh, well, my job is just simply to be the, coordinator for leadership development, right? You are not the coordinator for leadership development if you are on student affairs staff and you are a black individual. You are everybody's auntie, you're everybody's mama, you're everybody, like you are that person who students will confide in and come to with all of their issues, all of their problems and all that. And while it may be great for students to have somebody in that role, when you're tasked with doing that, in addition to doing your job, in addition to setting your budget and planning these other events outside of all of this, it takes a strain. It's a big strain. And then you do all of this, and your budget looks the same, and your salary looks the same, and you're trying to feed your family and be the support system for them, right? I don't know why I started talking that high. I was just like, I just had to let people know, because I see so many different people deal with this. I see it, my boss right now, I work in student affairs at UChicago, and she is an incredible individual, but like, she is the point person. She had to get a doorbell on her office. Like, she keeps it outside of like the student affairs suite, and so when students need to come in and they need to check in, they will ring this doorbell underneath the table and come in and see her, in addition to running this whole scholarship foundation that she's doing right now, right? And she makes time in her schedule to do that because she cares. But why should she have to do that? Like, if we say that we value equity, we value diversity, we value all of this stuff, right? If it's a value, it should be represented in the bylines, period. Anybody else? Feel free. Are we cutting it off? Okay. Oh, can I take one more?
I'm sorry.
Yes, piano. Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
My name is Zhining Zhang. You can call me Francis, and I'm a history sophomore student now. So I'm very glad to speak history by dividing to his story. Because this is really, these words is really remind me every day to see history objective. So I think that something for you do that things and people fight with some biases, it's not just only about some objective or subjective, whatever. So I'm not have any worries about to help people fight with some bias. I never regret my choices. So please forgive me to represent some people have some worries about how we balance the objective ourselves and subjective ourselves under the social justice. Because I think justice for me is the words in the middle between subjective and objective.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me know. So you want me to respond to that? Do you?
Yeah,
okay.
I just stand here and take some notes. Sorry.
Oh.
Because I want to show my respect.
All right. Well, I think that's an incredible way to look at advocacy, right? Because that's the way in which I try to see it. That's an A student. That, right? That was the way in which I had to see it, right? Because your experience oftentimes determines your view of reality. And everybody, many times, although we may somewhat live in the same reality, we have different experiences within it. And if you're not knowledgeable of other people's experiences, it's easy to discredit them, it's easy to devaluate them, and just make it seem like, oh, this is just your problem over here. This is a single isolated incident. That's what they called a lot of our stuff, that Facebook post. They called it a single isolated incident. It didn't understand that whole post, and with it including all of these different experiences, was not talking about a single isolated incident. It was talking about a culture that we have here that we need to change. So subjective versus objective, I think it's really difficult because what some of us are trying to say in all of this is that it doesn't always work like that for everybody, right? Because the personal is political for many people. Like what it felt like to be handed a binder, to transition into this incredible office that we were excited to embark on, but we were also kind of scared in many different ways. But for somebody to look at us and say, don't say anything like this, about this. Don't say anything about Ferguson. When we're clearly both Black individuals who can see this culture play out in the way that we're treated, in the way that our family members are treated. And for those of us who think, those people out there who think that we are some kind of exception. Because people will always try to call you an exception. Oh, well, you talk differently. Oh, you do this, you do that, blah, blah, blah. You have this high office, blah, 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 blah. So you're different. And I'm like, I'm telling you, me walking down the streets of Huntington, Pennsylvania, or anywhere outside of this area, they don't give a damn that I was the MLK speaker today, or that I was president of MSA at Mizzou, or that I'm in school getting another fancy little degree, or all that kind of stuff, right? Because they see this. This is what they see. So I think that in reality, we have to take the time, as we do look subjectively and both objectively, to truly take the time to really understand that there are so many different experiences that are all reflected throughout both of those. Did that kind of give, did I answer some of that?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And good luck here.
So we want to thank you. If you will allow me, since we talked about community, it is the birthday of one in our community, so happy birthday, Charisma. Let us all thank Payton Head for his time with us this evening. If you still have some questions, you may come down and ask him personally. We are going to dismiss for this evening. Thank you for being a great audience. Have a great evening.